When his mother hurled a bowl of boiling soup straight into his face, Julian silently glanced up at the security camera recording everything. He walked out of the million-dollar mansion with only an old wallet, but inside it held the key that would collapse the agri-tech empire he built in just 72 hours, leaving his mother and sister with nothing. The heat did not come from the Texas sun outside. It radiated from the liquid searing into my skin, a slow, agonizing crawl of fire across my right cheek and down my shoulder. I stood frozen in the center of a $250,000 kitchen, a masterpiece of Italian marble and smart technology located in the heart of Austin's most exclusive zip code. The air conditioning hummed at a perfect 68 degrees, yet I felt like I was standing in an oven. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you, Julian," Eleanor said. Her voice was not a scream. It was worse. It was the cold, calculated tone of a woman who had long ago traded her maternal instincts for profit margins. I did not move. I did not wipe the broth dripping from my chin onto the polished floor. I simply watched her. My mother stood there, her hand still hovering in the air where she had launched the bowl of scalding soup. Behind her, Amber leaned against the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with a practiced indifference that chilled me more than the burn on my face. Amber was the face of our social media, the visionary influencer who spent her days taking credit for the code I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing. "You're being selfish," Eleanor continued, stepping closer. "Thorn Agritech needs a fresh start. Investors want a face they can relate to, someone with charisma. Amber has that. You are just the boy in the basement. Hand over the master encryption keys to the irrigation software by tonight, or you can find somewhere else to live. This house, the company, the legacy, it all belongs to the Thorn name. And right now, you are acting like a stranger to this family." The injustice of her words felt heavier than the physical pain. I had spent 18 months rebuilding this company from the $85,000 debt my father left behind. I had turned a failing ranch into a $10 million tech enterprise while they spent the dividends on designer handbags and trips to Tulum. "The code is mine, Eleanor," I said. My voice was steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "I built the sensors. I wrote the predictive algorithms. You cannot just give 18 months of my life to someone who does not even know the difference between a back-end server and a router." Eleanor's eyes narrowed into slits. "I am your mother. Everything you have I gave to you. If you refuse to support your sister's career, you are nothing but a liability." She reached for another pot on the stove, her face contorted with a sudden, ugly rage. I saw her knuckles whiten around the handle, but I did not flinch. I did not shout back. Instead, I slowly raised my eyes toward the ceiling. In the corner of the high-vaulted kitchen, a small blue light flickered on the Nest Smart camera. It was a top-of-the-line security system, one I had installed myself to protect the house. It was motion-activated recording in high definition, and at that very moment it was uploading the footage of my mother's assault to a secure cloud server that only I could access. She followed my gaze, her expression flickering with a moment of doubt, but the entitlement won. She did not care about the camera because she truly believed she was untouchable. "Get out," she hissed. "Leave the keys to the Tesla on the counter. You take nothing that this company paid for." I turned away from her without a word. I walked past the professional-grade appliances and the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked our $2.5 million ranch. I headed to the mudroom where my small backpack sat by the door. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the only thing that actually mattered. It was a worn dark brown leather wallet. My father had pressed it into my hand the night before he passed away. The leather was cracked, and the edges were frayed, but inside the words he had commissioned were still deeply engraved into the hide, "You are enough." That wallet was the only thing I carried as I walked out of the front door. I did not take the designer clothes. I did not take the company laptop. I stepped out into the humid Texas afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of cedar and impending rain. As I walked down the long gravel driveway, the pain on my face began to throb in rhythm with my heartbeat. I looked back at the house of glass and steel monument to the people who had just tried to erase me. I realized then that they thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my identity because they had taken my title and my home. They were wrong. They had the building, but I had the intelligence. They had the brand, but I had the truth. And most importantly, they had no idea that the video of Eleanor's outburst was already sitting in my inbox waiting for the right moment to be seen. I touched the scorched skin on my cheek and felt a strange sense of clarity. The betrayal was complete. The cord was cut. I realized in that moment that sometimes blood is not thicker than water. Sometimes blood is just a rope that the people who should love you use to try and hang you. I reached the gate, opened my phone, and called a ride. My journey did not end here. It was just shifting to a different battlefield. The motel in East Austin smelled of stale tobacco and cheap industrial cleaner, a harsh contrast to the lavender-scented halls of the ranch I had just been exiled from. I sat on the edge of a sagging mattress watching the neon sign of a nearby taco stand flicker against the peeling wallpaper. My first stop after leaving the house had not been a lawyer or a friend's couch. It was the emergency room at St. David's. In the United States, pain is subjective, but a medical report is an objective legal weapon. The physician had been thorough. He documented the second-degree burns stretching across my zygomatic bone and down to my jawline. He took high-resolution photographs, recorded the exact temperature of the liquid based on the skin's reaction, and handed me a thick manila envelope. In the eyes of the state of Texas, that envelope was no longer just a medical record. It was evidence of aggravated battery. As I touched the cool paper, the physical throbbing in my face felt like a countdown to a reckoning. To Eleanor and Amber, I was a defeated boy hiding in a dive motel. They saw a kid who had walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a frayed wallet. They did not understand that I had been practicing for this abandonment my entire life. I leaned back against the headboard, my mind drifting to the sweltering summer 3 years ago when my father passed away. He had left behind a legacy of dirt and a staggering debt of $85,000. The bank was days away from foreclosing on the family land. Eleanor had wanted to sell the soil for scrap, to carve it into tiny suburban lots and move on. She saw dirt, I saw data. I had spent those first 18 months living on black coffee and adrenaline. I crawled through the mud to install handmade sensors in the Texas clay. I stayed awake until the sun rose over the Austin skyline, writing thousands of lines of Python code to create a predictive irrigation system that could save a farm 40% on its water bill during a drought. I transformed that $85,000 hole into Thorn Agritech, a company now valued at $10 million. I was the architect of every patent, the author of every algorithm, and the sole reason the company had a Series A funding round on the horizon. And yet, Eleanor believed that because she held the deed to the house, she owned the soul of the machine. I reached for my father's leather wallet resting on the bedside table. I ran my thumb over the engraving, "You are enough," feeling the ridges of the letters. It was a sentimental object, yes, but it was also a masterpiece of concealment. I pried open a hidden stitched seam in the interior fold that my father had showed me when I was 12 years alone. Out slid a slim metallic device no larger than a thumb drive. It was a ledger hardware wallet, a cold storage device. Eleanor and Amber were currently celebrating at the ranch, likely drinking expensive champagne and planning how to market Amber as the new face of the company. They had the physical servers. They had the office furniture. They had the registered trademark. They held the body of Thorn Agritech. But they did not have the brain. This hardware wallet contained the master encryption keys and the root access protocols for the entire Thorn cloud network. Without these keys, the software was a locked black box. No one could update the code, no one could onboard new clients, and most importantly, no one could stop the system from its scheduled maintenance cycles. I had built the system to be decentralized and secure. By forcing me out, they had effectively locked themselves out of their own house without realizing I was the only one holding the key. In the tech world, possession is not 9/10 of the law, access is. Eleanor thought she had won because she had the physical space, but in the modern era, the most valuable real estate is measured in bits and bytes. I looked at the medical report and then at the hardware wallet. One would destroy her reputation and her freedom. The other would destroy her fortune. I had been a loyal son. I had been a silent worker. I had allowed them to take the credit and the luxury while I took the labor. But the moment that scalding soup hit my face, the Julian Thorne who sought their approval died. I stood up and walked to the small desk by the window, opening my laptop. The glow of the screen reflected off the white gauze on my cheek. I reached out to Silas, a lawyer known in Austin for being a shark in intellectual property disputes. My message was short and devoid of emotion. I have the medical evidence of the assault. I have the cloud footage from the kitchen. And I have the master keys. It is time to initiate the transition. I closed the laptop and looked out at the city lights. I was no longer the boy in the basement. I was the owner of the future they were trying to sell, and for the first time in my life I realized my father was right. I was enough, and they were about to find out exactly how much enough was going to cost them. Silas sat across from me in a dimly lit corner of a downtown Austin steakhouse, his presence as sharp as the crease in his pinstriped suit. He was not just a lawyer, he was a specialist in the high-stakes world of Texas intellectual property. He did not offer me sympathy for the burn on my face. Instead, he pulled a digital tablet from his briefcase and tapped the screen. "The medical report is solid, Julian," Silas said, his voice a low baritone. "In Texas, this is aggravated assault. Your ER report and that kitchen footage give the DA plenty to work with. But that is just the beginning. We are not just going for a settlement. We are going for the throne." I handed him the hardware wallet I had retrieved from my father's secret compartment. "This is the heartbeat of the company. Without it, the software's a brick. But I need more than just a technical lockout. I need to know how they managed to shove me into a corner for 18 months. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was an encrypted file from Cassidy, my former lead developer, and the only person at Thorne Agritech who knew where the digital bodies were buried. Cassidy had been sidelined by Eleanor months ago, replaced by a marketing team that prioritized Amber's Instagram aesthetic over system stability. I opened the file under the table. It was a series of internal ledger exports that Eleanor thought she had purged from the local server. The numbers were staggering. Over the last fiscal year, Eleanor had authorized marketing expenses, totaling $1.8 million. I scrolled through the line items: luxury villa rentals in Ibiza, a private jet to Paris Fashion Week, and a fleet of high-end vehicles all categorized as brand development for Amber. "They did not just sideline me, Silas," I whispered, sliding the phone toward him. "They have been embezzling from the Series A investment pool. This is federal fraud." Silas glanced at the spreadsheets, a cold smile spreading across his face. "This gives us leverage, but Eleanor is clever. She will claim these were legitimate business expenses for Amber's influence. We need a killing blow. We need to prove that she never had the legal right to authorize these payments in the first place." "She told me my father died intestate," I said, the bitterness rising in my throat. "She produced a notarized document from the county stating that without a will, she, as the surviving spouse, inherited full managerial control of the estate for the first 2 years. Silas leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "Julian, your father was a systems engineer. He spent 40 years obsessed with data integrity and redundancy. Does it honestly make sense to you that a man like that would leave his life's work to the mercy of a paper filing system he didn't trust?" He tapped a key on his tablet, bringing up a decentralized Ledger Explorera public blockchain interface. "I did some digging into your father's private digital footprints. Your father did not leave a paper will in a dusty safe. He was an early adopter. 3 years ago, he minted a smart contract." My heart skipped a beat. A smart contract was a self-executing digital agreement stored on the blockchain. It was immutable, unhackable, and eternally timestamped. "Look at the metadata," Silas instructed. I stared at the screen. There it was, verified on the Ethereum network and timestamped 6 months before my father's passing. The digital will was explicit. "Upon my death, 100% of the voting shares and intellectual property of Thorne Agritech shall vest immediately in my son Julian Thorne. Eleanor Thorne shall receive a fixed monthly stipend contingent upon her non-interference with the operations of the company. I felt the air leave my lungs. For 18 months, Eleanor had looked me in the eye and told me I was a guest in my own company. She had produced a forged paper will notarized by a crony to trick me into a subservient role. She had exploited my grief to turn me into her personal labor force, while she and Amber drained the company dry. She didn't just lie about the money. I realized, my hands shaking. She stole my entire existence. She knew about the digital will, didn't she? She likely found his private keys but could not crack the encryption. Silas explained. She assumed that if she kept you in the dark and buried the physical evidence, the digital version would never be found. She gambled on your ignorance. She lost. This was the turning point. In the eyes of the blockchain and by extension the modern Texas courts that were beginning to recognize these digital assets, I had been the sole owner of the company since the moment my father's heart stopped beating. Every contract Eleanor had signed, every dollar she had spent on Amber's luxury life, and every bowl of soup she had thrown in my face was an act of a usurper. The gala at the Domain is in 48 hours, I said, my voice hardening. Eleanor is planning to announce a new partnership and bring in another $5 million in venture capital. Then that is where we will end it, Silas replied, closing his tablet with a decisive snap. We won't just serve her papers, Julian. We will show the world who actually owns the light they are standing in. I touched the bandage on my face. The pain was still there, but the fire had moved from my skin to my soul. I was no longer a victim of a family tragedy. I was the rightful heir, and I was about to reclaim my kingdom. The ballroom at the Domain was a sanctuary of glass gold and whispered greed. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain over Austin's elite, while the scent of expensive perfume and Wagyu appetizers filled the air. At the far end of the room, a massive high-definition LED screen displayed a looping video of Amber laughing in a field of wildflowers, the words Thorne Agritech, the future of growth, etched in elegant gold script. Eleanor stood at the center of a circle of venture capitalists wearing a silk gown that likely cost more than my first 2 years of college. She was holding a flute of vintage champagne, her face radiating the practiced warmth of a successful matriarch. She was minutes away from closing a $5 million investment round that would cement her control and fund Amber's next year of vanity. I stood at the heavy oak entrance doors, adjusting the lapels of a charcoal gray tailored suit. I did not look like the boy who had been scorched in a kitchen 48 hours ago. Although a flesh-colored medical adhesive covered the burn on my cheek, it did not look like a wound. It looked like a badge of war. To my right stood Silas, looking like a grim reaper in a pinstriped suit, and to my left were 2 uniformed officers from the Austin Police Department. "Ready?" Silas asked quietly. "End it," I replied. We walked into the room. The rhythmic click of our shoes on the marble floor cut through the soft jazz. Heads began to turn. Eleanor spotted me first. Her smile did not falter, but her eyes turned into chips of ice. She whispered something to Amber, who looked up from her drink, her expression shifting from boredom to pure venom. Eleanor stepped forward, attempting to intercept us before we reached the center of the room. "Julian," she said, her voice a sharp stage whisper. "What is the meaning of this theater? This is a private event. If you want to apologize for your behavior, do it tomorrow. Leave now before you embarrass yourself further." I did not stop walking. I did not even look at her. I walked straight to the technical booth near the stage where a young audiovisual technician sat. I handed him an encrypted flash drive. "Run the file labeled Asset Protection," I told him. "Hey, you can't be back there," Amber shouted, rushing toward us, her heels clicking frantically. "Security, get this loser out of here." The security guards moved in, but Silas stepped forward holding up a legal injunction and a police badge. "We are here to serve a court-ordered freeze on all Thorne Agritech assets and to execute an arrest warrant for aggravated battery," Silas announced. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Suddenly, the screen behind the stage flickered. The beautiful images of wildflowers and Amber's smile vanished. In their place, a grainy, high-definition video from a Nest security camera filled the room. It was our kitchen. The timestamp showed 2 days ago. The audio was crystal clear. The elite of Austin watched in stunned silence as Eleanor's voice echoed through the ballroom. "You're just the boy in the basement. Hand over the master encryption keys, or you can find somewhere else to live." On the screen, Eleanor grabbed the pot of boiling soup. The room gasped as they watched her hurl the liquid directly into my face. They watched me stagger, but stay upright. They watched Eleanor's face contort with a terrifying, unhinged rage as she told her own son he was nothing but a liability. The video looped. The sound of the splash and my heavy, pained breathing filled the ballroom. I turned to face the circle of investors. These were men and women who lived by the code of leadership ethics and environmental, social, and governance standards. In the modern American business world, a scandal of this magnitude was a death sentence. You could survive a bad quarter, but you could not survive being caught on camera assaulting the founder and lead engineer of your own company. "My name is Julian Thorne," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the hall. "I am the sole legal owner of the patents and the software that drive this company. The woman standing before you has spent the last 18 months embezzling $1.8 million of company funds for personal luxury while falsifying the estate records of my late father." One of the lead investors, a man who'd been about to sign a $2 million check, stepped back from Eleanor as if she were radioactive. He tucked his fountain pen back into his pocket. "The deal is off, Eleanor. Do not call my office again." "Julian, stop this." Eleanor screamed, her poise finally shattering. Her face was now identical to the monster on the screen. "I am your mother. You are destroying everything." "No," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You destroyed it when you decided that a title was more important than the truth. I am just making sure everyone sees the wreckage." The 2 officers stepped forward. "Eleanor Thorne, you are under arrest for aggravated battery. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked into place, the room erupted into a frenzy of camera flashes and frantic whispers. Amber stood frozen, her phone in her hand, watching her world evaporate in real time. She looked at the screen, then at me, her mouth hanging open. I did not feel a rush of joy. I felt a profound sense of relief. The sanctuary of glass and gold had been shattered, and for the first time in 18 months I could breathe the air of a room that was no longer filled with lies. I turned my back on the stage and walked toward the exit, Silas following close behind. The gala was over, but my life was finally beginning. The following morning, the glass towers of downtown Austin felt cold and indifferent. Eleanor was out on bail, her face shielded by a silk scarf, as she hurried into Silas' conference room. Amber followed, her eyes red from crying, clutching a tablet as if it could save her. They were not here to apologize. They were here to threaten. "You think you have won because of a video?" Eleanor spat, slamming her hands on the mahogany table. "I still hold the corporate registration for Thorne Agritech. If you do not hand over those encryption keys and the hardware wallet, I will sue you for trade secret theft and corporate sabotage. I will spend every last dollar of the company's reserves to bury you in legal fees until you are rotting in a cell." I looked at her, and for the first time I felt a wave of genuine pity. She was still fighting for a kingdom that had already turned to ash. "The reserves are gone, Eleanor," I said quietly. "Between the freeze Silas placed on the accounts and the forensic audit of that $1.8 million you spent on Amber's vacations, there is nothing left to pay a lawyer." "It does not matter," Amber shrieked, her voice cracking. "We have the servers, we have the customers. I will hire a new developer to bypass your locks." I leaned forward, my shadow falling across the table. "That is the second mistake you made. You never bothered to understand how my irrigation software actually works. I did not just build a tool, I built a living ecosystem. And that ecosystem requires a heartbeat." I checked my watch. It has been exactly 72 hours since I was forced out of the house, 72 hours since my last authorized biometric login. At that exact moment, Amber's tablet began to chime with frantic notifications. Eleanor's phone started vibrating incessantly on the table. "What is happening?" Eleanor whispered, staring at her screen. I programmed a deadman switch into the kernel of the operating system. I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. It is a standard security protocol for high-end military tech. If the lead architect does not check in for 72 hours, the system assumes a hostile takeover or a catastrophic failure. It initiates a total encryption lock. As of 3 minutes ago, every smart sensor and irrigation valve from here to the Rio Grande has shut down. The color drained from Eleanor's face. You killed the crops, you destroyed the customers." "No," I corrected. "I protected the integrity of the intellectual property, but the consequence is the same. Hundreds of commercial farms are currently losing thousands of gallons of water or facing total dehydration of their topsoil. And since you are the registered manager on the corporate filings, the liability falls entirely on you." "The phone calls," Amber gasped, looking at her screen. "It is the Miller farm, the Henderson Ranch. They are saying they are going to sue us for millions in lost harvest." "They will," Silas added, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "We have already received notice of 3 class action filings. Since you claimed the company was yours, Eleanor, you are now personally responsible for the catastrophic breach of contract. The damages will exceed $10 million. You are not just broke, you are a debt slave for the rest of your life." Eleanor collapsed into her chair, her silk scarf falling to the floor. The silence in the room was suffocating. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for a mercy she had never shown. "Julian, please," she whimpered, "turn it back on. For the family." "I'm not your family," I said. "I'm the liability you tried to erase." And thus, I walked out of the room, leaving them to the sound of ringing phones and the reality of their own greed. I went down to the lobby and sat on a stone bench, pulling my father's wallet from my pocket. I needed to feel the leather to remind myself why I had endured it all. As I ran my fingers along the inside pocket, I noticed a slight stiffness in the leather that I had never felt before. I took a small pocket knife and carefully slit the stitching behind the "You Are Enough" engraving. A thin yellowed piece of stationery fell out. It was my father's handwriting, blocky precise, and filled with a hidden sorrow. "Julian," the letter began. "If you are reading this, the storm has finally arrived. I knew Eleanor was unfaithful long before she thought I suspected. I knew about her plans to redirect the estate. I stayed as long as I could to build a wall around you, but I knew my heart would fail before I could finish the work. This wallet isn't just a gift, it is a shield. I left the hardware wallet and the blockchain will because I knew they would try to steal the paper world from you. Do not feel guilty for the fire that consumes them. I let her stay so you would have the land to build your dream, but I left the keys in your hand so you could lock the door when she turned into a stranger. You were always more than enough, son. Protect the truth." Tears finally blurred my vision. He had known. He had spent his final days in a house with a woman who betrayed him just to ensure that I would have the tools to survive her. The wallet was not just a memento, it was his final act of fatherhood, a lifeline thrown across the chasm of death. I folded the letter and placed it back into the secret pocket. I looked up at the Austin sky, the clouds breaking to let the sun through. Eleanor and Amber were gone, buried under the weight of their own malice. Thorn Agritech, as they knew it, was dead. But I was still standing, and for the first time, the weight of the legacy did not feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. I stood up, walked to my car, and drove away from the towers of glass, heading toward the only thing that had ever been real: the land, the code, and the truth. The resolution of the Thorn estate was as swift as it was brutal. In the United States, the legal system moves slowly until fraud and federal crimes are involved, at which point it accelerates like a landslide. The $2.5 million ranch in the hills was seized and liquidated within months to satisfy the mountain of civil judgments from angry farmers, and the unpaid taxes Eleanor had ignored. I watched from a distance as the life they had curated for social media was dismantled piece by men in dark suits with clipboards. Eleanor and Amber did not leave with the dignity they once performed. They were moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a neglected part of the city, a place where the air conditioning rattled and the windows looked out over a concrete parking lot instead of rolling hills. The designer handbags were sold at auction. The luxury vehicles were repossessed. For them, the silence of that small apartment must have been the loudest punishment of all. No followers to applaud their lies. No servants to hide their flaws. The final act took place in a sterile government auction room. Because the company's reputation had been tarnished by Eleanor's arrest, and the system lockout, the market value of Thorn Agritech had plummeted. To the public, it was a radioactive asset. But I knew the truth. I knew the code was still perfect. I knew the sensors were still the best in the world. When the trademark and the remaining physical assets of the company were put on the block, I sat in the back row. I bid a fraction of what the company was worth, barely 1/10 of the $10 million valuation we had once reached. There were no other bidders. The gavel fell, and for a few $100,000, I owned the name Thorn again. As I signed the final paperwork, the clerk looked at the bandage on my face, which had finally been replaced by a thin, permanent scar. "Must be a tough business," he remarked. I smiled, a genuine, quiet expression. "It is an honest one now," I replied. I moved into a modest studio in East Austin. It was a space filled with light plants and the hum of a single powerful server. I did not rebuild the company in a glass tower. I rebuilt it in the quiet hours of the morning, working with Cassidy and a small team of developers who valued integrity over influence. We rebranded as Thorn Legacy Systems. Within 6 months, every farmer who had sued Eleanor had signed a new contract with me. I gave them a year of free service as a gesture of goodwill. In business, as in life, trust is the only currency that never devalues. I often sit on my small balcony, looking towards the horizon where the sun sets over the Texas hill country. I still have my father's wallet. The leather is even softer now, the engraving a bit more worn, but the message is clearer than ever. I realize now that my journey was never about the money, the patents, or the revenge. I did not simply take back a company. I took back my freedom. I took back the right to define who I am without the suffocating shadow of people who only loved my utility. The scar on my cheek has faded to a silver line, a physical map of the day I stopped being a victim and started being a man. It is no longer a mark of shame. It is a mark of survival. My life is quiet now, and in that quiet I have found a strength that noise could never produce. I have learned that the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to erase you is to live a life so authentic that their lies have nowhere to land. If you are listening to this, and you are feeling the sting of a betrayal from the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to hear me. You are not defined by the fire they threw you into. You are defined by the person who walked out of the flames. Do not stay in the house that hurts you just because you are afraid of the cold outside. The cold is where you find your fire. The silence is where you find your voice. And the abandonment is where you find the only person who can truly save you, yourself. Remember this: your scars today are your armor for tomorrow. They are proof that you are stronger than the hands that tried to break you. You are enough. You have always been enough. If my story touched you, or if you are going through your own chapter of fire, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let this be a place where we remind each other that we are not alone in the dark. Your voice has power. Your story matters. And if you believe in the power of the truth, consider subscribing to this channel. Every listener helps us keep the light on for those who are still searching for their way out. My name is Julian Thorn, and this was the day I walked away. Thank you for listening.